Every pineapple you have ever eaten grew on a plant that produced exactly one. Not one a season, not one a year. One. The plant spends somewhere between 18 months and 2 years building a single fruit, and when that fruit is cut, the plant's work is finished. What is left standing in the field is a rosette of long, stiff leaves, up to 1.5 meters across, with edges sharp enough to open your hands if you grab them wrong. And there are a great many of them. Across the world's pineapple plantations, the leaves left behind after harvest add up to something in the region of 13 million tons every single year. Almost all of it is burned or plowed under or left in heaps to rot. Now here is the part that made me want to make this video. Somebody worked out how to pull that leaf apart, take the fiber out of the middle of it, and turn it into a material that luxury brands now buy by the roll and sell as an alternative to leather. Shoes, bags, jackets. Objects with 4-figure price tags whose raw material was, a few months earlier, on fire in a field. It takes roughly 460 leaves to make 1 square meter of it, which means a single pair of shoes represents the discarded top half of a substantial patch of farmland. So how does it actually happen? How do you get a soft fiber out of a leaf that cuts your hands? How do you do it on a plantation in the middle of nowhere, without a factory and without water? And why is this material, which every article calls an innovation, actually something people were weaving by hand 400 years ago and very nearly forgot how to do? Stay with me, because we're going to walk the whole thing in order. From a field of cut plants, through the machine that strips the leaf, the washing, the drying, the pressing, the finishing, and the cutting table, all the way to a shop window. And then, at the end, I'm going to tell you about a province in the Philippines where a handful of women have been making a far more valuable version of this fabric, by hand, without stopping, since the 1600s. This is going to take a while, and it is worth every minute. Subscribe before we start, and tell me down in the comments where in the world you are right now. Let's begin with the plant, because almost everything strange about this industry comes from one biological fact. A pineapple is not a tree fruit, and it does not grow on a vine. It grows out of the center of a low, spiky rosette that sits close to the ground, and the whole plant is essentially a machine for producing that one fruit. It takes its time. Depending on climate and variety, a plant needs roughly 18 months to 2 years from planting to a harvestable fruit. That is a long time to occupy a piece of ground, and the fruit itself is a strange object. What looks like one fruit is actually the fused remains of dozens of separate flowers, each of which contributed one of those diamond-shaped segments on the outside. Run your eye over a pineapple skin and you are counting flowers. Once the fruit is cut, the plant will try again. It sends out suckers from the base, and a grower can get a second and sometimes a third crop from the same root system, each one smaller and slower than the last. Eventually, the yield drops far enough that the whole field is cleared and replanted. And that is the moment this story is about. Because when a field is cleared, what comes out of the ground is an enormous volume of leaf, and it has almost no value. Look closely at one of those leaves, and you can see why nobody wanted it. It is long, tapering, and rigid, with a waxy surface and a spine running down the center. The margins on many varieties carry small, hard spines that point toward the tip, so the leaf will slide through your hand one way and shred it the other. It does not compost quickly. It does not make good animal feed. It does not burn cleanly, and it is heavy with water and pulp. Only a small fraction of the leaf's weight is the thing anybody wants, because inside that leaf, running from base to tip, there are fibers. Long, strong, pale fibers that the plant uses to hold the leaf rigid against wind and its own weight. They are among the finer natural fibers available anywhere, and they are locked inside a mass of wet green tissue that has to be destroyed to get at them. So for most of the history of industrial pineapple growing, the answer was simple: burn it. You can see it from the air in the growing regions, fields of cut plants, and smoke. Burning is fast, it is free, it clears the ground for replanting, and it kills whatever pests were living in the debris. It also puts a very large amount of smoke into the air over a farming community every single season. And that is the part that eventually made somebody look for another use. Now let me take you into a field on the day it is cleared, because this is where the modern chain begins. The fruit is already gone. What is standing is a field of green rosettes, and a crew moves through them, cutting the leaves off at the base. A great deal of this is still done by hand, with a curved blade, and the reason is the same reason the leaf was never used before. The plants are low, the ground between the rows is uneven, and the leaves point in every direction. Getting a machine to cut at the right height without dragging soil into the crop is genuinely difficult. So people do it. They work in long sleeves and gloves even in tropical heat, because the leaf margins will find any bare skin. The cut leaves go into bundles, and the bundles go onto a trailer or onto the back of a motorbike, and they are taken to the edge of the field. There is a clock running from the moment the leaf is cut. Fresh leaf is wet and full of sugars, and in a hot climate it starts to ferment and discolor within a day or two. Fiber extracted from a leaf that has sat too long comes out darker, weaker, and harder to clean. So the extraction has to happen fast, and that is why it happens where it does. We are about a third of the way in, and it only gets stranger from here. A like helps this reach someone else who would want to see it. Now the machine, and this is the step that made the whole industry possible. It is called a decorticator, and what it does is beat the leaf to pieces while leaving the fiber intact. A leaf is fed in between rollers. Inside, a drum spins at speed, carrying a set of blunt blades, and those blades scrape and beat along the length of the leaf as it passes. The soft green tissue is smashed and scraped away. The fibers, which are far stronger and more flexible than the tissue holding them, survive. What comes out the other side is a hank of long, pale strands, still damp, still carrying green residue, but recognizably fiber rather than leaf. And here is the detail that matters more than any other in this process. It happens in the field, not in a factory. The decorticator is small enough to sit at the edge of a plantation, and it uses no added water at all. The only moisture involved is the water that was already inside the leaf. That is not a minor point. Almost every other fiber on Earth needs water at the extraction stage. Flax and hemp are traditionally retted, which means soaking them until bacteria rot away the tissue around the fiber, and that produces a large volume of foul effluent. Cotton needs irrigation before you even get to processing. Pineapple leaf skips all of it because the plant already did the hard part by growing the fiber in the first place. And there is a second output from that machine, which turns out to matter commercially. The smashed green tissue that comes off the leaf does not go to waste either. It is collected and composted into a nutrient-rich fertilizer or processed into biofuel, and it goes back to the farm as a second income. So the same operation that used to produce smoke now produces two saleable products and no fire. For a farmer, that is the entire argument. Not sustainability in the abstract. Two revenue streams from something that used to cost money to get rid of. Now the fiber has to be cleaned, and this is slower and less photogenic than the machine. First, washing, to take off the green residue and the plant sugars that would otherwise attract mold. The fiber comes out of the wash a dull greenish cream and is spread out to dry. Drying is usually done in the sun, on racks, or on clean ground, and it is watched carefully, because fiber that dries too slowly goes moldy, and fiber that bakes in full tropical sun goes brittle. In wetter regions, there are drying ovens, which cost money and are used because the alternative is losing batches. Then, degumming, which is the step that turns a rough agricultural product into a textile fiber. Natural plant fibers do not come out as clean single strands. They come out as bundles, glued together by gums and pectins. Left in place, those gums make the fiber stiff, uneven, and unable to take dye properly. Degumming removes them, usually with a mild alkaline treatment, sometimes with enzymes, and the difference is dramatic. Before degumming, the fiber feels like coarse string. After it, it is soft, separated, and pale, and it moves like hair. That is the point at which the material stops looking like something scraped out of a leaf and starts looking like something you would put against your skin. Then the fiber goes in two completely different directions, and it is worth understanding both, because they end up in very different places. The first direction is the one everybody has heard about. The dried, degummed fiber is mixed with a binder and laid down into a non-woven mat. Non-woven means exactly what it says. There is no spinning, no yarn, and no weaving. The fibers are laid in a random tangle and bonded together into a continuous sheet, in the same general way felt is made. That sheet is then finished. It is coated to give it a surface, embossed to give it a texture, colored, and given a backing, so it behaves like a panel of material rather than a mat of fiber. And that is the material that leaves the plant on rolls and arrives at a shoe factory. Now, I'm going to be straight about the coating, because a lot of the marketing around this material is not. A mat of plant fiber on its own is not waterproof, not abrasion resistant, and not something you could make a shoe out of. To behave like leather, it needs a finish, and that finish is a polymer. The better products use a bio-based resin, and the whole thing is designed to break down at end of life. Others use ordinary polyurethane, which does not. So the honest description of this material is not that it is plant leather. It is that it is a plant fiber base with a polymer surface, and the proportion of each varies enormously between manufacturers, and almost none of them tell you the number on the label, which is a familiar situation. If you watched what I have to say about the word genuine leather, this is the same problem wearing different clothes. The word on the label is doing a lot of work that the material underneath cannot support on its own. That does not make it a bad material. It makes it a material with a specification, and the specification is worth asking for. Now let me take you into the factory that turns that roll into an object. It looks, at first glance, exactly like a leather goods factory, because, functionally, it is one. There is a cutting room, with the roll laid out flat on a long table. There is a difference here that the cutters appreciate immediately. A hide is the shape of an animal, with legs at the corners and scars in the middle, and every layout is a puzzle. A roll of non-woven material is a rectangle of consistent thickness and grade, with no brands, no barbed wire scars, and no insect damage anywhere in it, which means the cutter's job changes completely. Yield goes up, waste goes down. A pattern that would have been impossible to place on a hide because of a scar goes straight onto the material without a thought. The panels are cut, either with a press knife or on a computer-controlled cutting bed. They are skived along the folding edges, exactly as leather is. They are glued, folded, and stitched. And then finishing. Edge paint on the cut edges in layers, sanded between coats. Hardware fitted. A final inspection under a lamp by somebody whose job is to find reasons to reject it. The object that comes off the end of that line is, to look at, indistinguishable from a leather one. It has grain. It has a finished edge. It has weight in the hand. Put it in a window with a price card, and nobody would ask. Stop for a moment and think about the distance that material has traveled. It began as a leaf on a plant that had already given up its only fruit, standing in a field that was about to be cleared and burned. Somebody in long sleeves cut it by hand in tropical heat, knowing the margins would find any gap in the glove. It went through a drum of blunt blades that beat the leaf apart and left the fiber standing. It was washed, laid out in the sun, watched so that it neither molded nor baked, and treated to strip the gums that held the strands together. It was laid into a mat, bonded, coated, embossed, and rolled. It was cut, skived, glued, and stitched by people doing exactly what people in a leather factory do. And somebody held it under a lamp and decided it was good enough. 460 leaves, 1 square meter. Before the last part, tell me one thing in the comments. Did any of this change how you think about it? I genuinely want to know. Because there is one more thing to say about this material, and it turns the whole story around. Every article you will read about pineapple leaf fiber calls it an innovation, a breakthrough, a new sustainable material. It is not new. It is a rediscovery, and the original is better. Pineapples are not native to the Philippines. They come from South America, and the Spanish brought them across in the late 1500s. Within a century, people in the Philippines were doing something with the leaves that nobody in South America had thought to do. They were extracting the fiber by hand and weaving it into cloth. The cloth is called Piña, and it is not like the material we have just watched being made. It is not a bonded mat with a coating. It is a woven textile, thread by thread, on a wooden hand loom. And it is so fine and so translucent that it belongs to a family of Philippine fabrics known as nipis, meaning thin. The 19th century was its golden age, on the island of Panay in particular. Piña was regarded as a fabric fit for royalty. It was a luxury export. European aristocracy wore it in the 1700s and 1800s, at a time when almost nothing from that part of the world reached European wardrobes at all. And the work behind it is on a completely different scale to anything in a modern factory. The fiber is separated by hand, scraped from the leaf with a shard or a blade, one leaf at a time. The individual filaments are then knotted together end to end by hand to make a continuous thread. Knotted. Every join on every thread tied by a person. That thread is then woven, usually mixed with silk to give the cloth strength, on a wooden hand loom, by women, most of them in the province of Aklan. A skilled worker can spend an entire day extracting fiber and produce enough for only a fraction of a single garment. And the garment it is most associated with is the barong Tagalog, the formal shirt that was named the national dress of the Philippines in 1975. A piña barong is not clothing in the ordinary sense. It is an heirloom. The craft very nearly died. Industrial textiles arrived, cheaper and faster, and hand-weaving collapsed almost everywhere it had existed. After a fire destroyed the weaving district of Molo, Artisans moved back to Aklan, and Aklan became the only place where the technique survived at all. Not one of several centers, the only one. And then, in December of 2023, Piña handloom weaving from Aklan was inscribed on the list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. It is the only leaf fiber weaving technique on that list. So hold the two things next to each other. On one side, a modern plant taking 13 million tons of agricultural waste, running it through a decorticator in a field, bonding it into sheets, coating it in polymer, and selling it to fashion brands as the material of the future. On the other side, in one province, a small number of women scraping the same leaf with the same kind of blade their great-grandmothers used, knotting the filaments together one at a time, and weaving a cloth that has been considered a luxury for 400 years, and still is. Both of them are pineapple leaf. Both of them are real. And the one everybody is calling an innovation is the cheaper of the two by an enormous margin. We did not invent this material. We found a way to make a rougher version of it very quickly, at a moment when the original was down to one province and almost gone. So let me change the scale one last time. 13 million tons a year. That is the number for the leaves alone, and almost all of it still burns. Because the industry we have just walked through is tiny compared to the volume available. What we have looked at is not a solution to that waste, it is a demonstration that the waste was never waste. And that is the thing I keep coming back to. Nothing about that leaf changed. It has always had fiber in it. It had fiber in it in the 1600s when somebody in the Philippines first scraped one clean and looked at what was left. It had fiber in it every year of the 20th century while the fields burned. The only thing that changed is that somebody decided to look at it again. So the next time you cut the top off a pineapple, look at the leaves for a second before they go in the bin. That is the same material. Somebody, somewhere, is weaving it into something that will outlive them. Somewhere right now, all of this is happening again. Another field being cleared, another drum turning, another thread being knotted by hand. Thank you for stopping to look at it with me. Like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Until next time, keep looking closely.